Good morning, one and all, and welcome to the main object big book study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David. Good to see you all. And why don't we start the meeting? I'd like to, I'm going to play a little bit of Zoom roulette here, and I'm going to ask my friend Joni H. Joni H, would you be so kind as to read the preamble and I will put it up on the screen for you?
I would be happy to.
Oh, thank you. Okay, here we go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joni. I'm an alcoholic. AA Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Joni, thank you so much. And now I'd like to ask everybody to join me in inviting God into this morning's meeting by joining together in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So welcome one and all, and I know that we have some new people here today, so I'll just go very quickly through what we do and what we're about here. We are a line by line big book study, so we go slowly through the book, and what we find is that by doing so, I don't know if anybody else has encountered this, but the big book, because of when it was written, and also I think the particular focus that Bill had when writing it, its message and its impact, while some aspects are very clear and immediate, some of them take a little bit of time and reflection to sink in. And so what we find is that by going slowly and looking very closely at how the book is put together and the relationship between the various parts, what we see is the larger message really starts to emerge. And so one of the things that we do as well is we break the text down, or we categorize the text into 5 separate categories. And I'll just show you those. And here are those categories: questions, directions and explanations, promises, warnings, and history. Now, the colors that you see there are highlighter colors that I've chosen. You can choose your own. And that information is also in the chat. So if you don't get it on the shared screen, that's fine. It's in the chat. And what I find is that when I do that, not only does it make it easier to grasp what Bill is trying to write in the text, but it also really equips my big book to be a tool that I can then use to share the message with other people. And I think that's really important. Because ultimately, isn't that what it's about? It's not just about me grasping this message, so I get it. I'm like in the know now. It's really about me having the tools I need in order to be, as the book says, of maximum use to other alcoholics and those about me. So that said, we are we're going to be talking today in more about alcoholism, page 35 near the top. I will talk today until about 7 o'clock, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion and all of that. The meeting today is being recorded because we keep an archive of all of our meetings, although only my section will be recorded, so you don't need to, if you make comments or have a question, you don't need to worry about ending up on YouTube. And we do have a YouTube archive. I think all our meetings are the first, everything after the first month is up there. So that said, why don't we jump in? And if you've got your book, now I'm using a study edition, but you can certainly just use a any edition of the big book. But I am on page 35, and I am starting at the second full paragraph rather. And so just to sort of summarize where we're at and what we're going to focus on today. In today's reading, Bill, who, as we're starting to see, is the ever enthusiastic storyteller, he drives home the idea of powerlessness. So we're really focusing on this first step. And he does this today, we'll see, with perhaps one of the most well-known stories in the entire big book, the saga of Jim the Car Salesman. Now, with this tale, Bill illustrates that because Jim failed to enlarge his spiritual life, he remains easy prey for the quote-unquote peculiar mental twist that leads to the first drink. And what we see is that in looking at the history of Jim's story and the identity of Jim himself, I did some research on this, and what I recognized is that this account of Jim it's unlikely that it is an actual set of events that happened to one person. Instead, Bill he probably assembled this story based on elements from other people. For a while, there was thinking that the story was from a gentleman named Ralph F., who, and I put some links in the chat about Ralph, and Ralph wrote a story that was in the first edition of the big book. Ralph had been a car salesman at one point, so there was a thought about that. But what they later saw is that Bill had a tendency at times to prioritize not just impact, but to really convey to us the spiritual plan or spiritual design of living over everything else. And so at times what he would do is he would pull together stories that weren't always historically accurate, but they really conveyed the impact of the message he was trying to share with us. So with that, let's jump into the text. We're on page 35, second full paragraph, and our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. Okay, so we're going to learn a little bit about Jim here. We're going to learn a little bit about his background. And I think that these details are important that we're about to learn, not just for the fact like, oh, isn't Jim an interesting guy? But there are certain qualities that Jim is bringing to try to solve his alcohol problem. And let's look at this. Okay. And by the way, these first, 5 lines or so are all explanation. So I have it in green. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. So we're going to assume, first of all, that Jim has a stable home life. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. Okay, we will see that today that's not the case. But Jim has maybe had a little bit of a charmed life. He had a commendable World War record. What this means is that Jim is not a fearful individual necessarily. He's a brave individual. He is a good salesman. So he's personable. Everybody likes him. So he's very sociable. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see. Okay, so everything's been green explanation up to this point, except for the next phrase, next rest of this sentence that I have in pink for a warning, except for a nervous disposition. Why do I highlight that in pink? Because that might tell you, that might give us a little bit of insight right there into Jim's personality. And one of the things that I saw when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous that I was taught was that I needed to, when I did my moral inventory, I needed to be searching and fearless. And what this meant was that I needed to look at the causes and conditions of my own behavior. So things that I thought were, I used to categorize things in terms of, well, that's just the way I am. Well, AA says, okay, that's all good, but we don't just cast aside these things about, quote unquote, just the way I am. We filter everything about ourselves and our lives through the 12 steps. And that we can see may be the case here. And let's hold on to this a second about nervous disposition, because this may be a clue into why Jim has struggled so much. Okay, so moving on. He did no drinking until he was 35. That's green explanation or direction. However, the next sentence I have in pink again for a warning. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. Think about this a second. If we weren't in an AA meeting, if we were like, let's say at the Kiwanis Club or at the Rotary Club or at the, or I don't know, at the neighborhood book club, and we talked about somebody who is a successful car salesman, great war record, everybody loves him, and then we say in a few years they became so violent when intoxicated he had to be committed. That doesn't quite fit, does it? It's like Sesame Street. One of these things are not like the others. Right, Donna gets it. So, but for us, it makes sense. And then the last sentence I have agreed again. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. Here's a key part, and I want to point this out because either next week or the week thereafter, we'll also be visiting with another friend, another illustration, Fred the accountant. And there are several stories early on in the book. Jim's one of them, Fred's another, where it was several years before I realized, oh, these guys aren't newcomers off the street. These guys are chronic relapsers. And one of the things that we'll notice, and the point there is not to point out, oh, if you're a chronic relapser, this is how bad you are. It's not that point. The point is they're aware of the 12 steps. They've worked with a sponsor. They are not ignorant of our process of recovery. They are steeped in it, yet they continue to drink. And I think that point is really important. The next sentence, I'm on 35, at the third full paragraph, is green. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning, also in new. I want to go back because there's a point, most of you probably got this, but just in case somebody didn't. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We may think, oh, insane asylum, he's crazy. Well, bear in mind, what we would probably call that today is a rehab. Okay, we wouldn't necessarily call it an asylum, but they didn't have, in 1939, they didn't have rehabs. So he comes to us out of rehab and he makes a beginning. Now here are, so I'm back in the third paragraph there, and we've got some rewards. He makes a start. His family was reassembled. That's a reward in blue. And he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. So let's think about it. Let's think about let's think if we were sponsoring Jim for a second. Okay, Jim lost the lucrative car business through drinking. Okay, that's tragic. However, even still, they hired him back. So there must be something about Jim that other people see as being redeemable. And he's given a chance. And here we go. The next sentence, or the next two sentences, are warnings. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. For a long time, I read that and just sort of breezed over that sentence. One thing I would hope today is that if we're reading this, that sentence would be, if we were having a beach meeting, that sentence would be the sentence I would hire the banner plane to come by and fly over and say, this is important, gang. He failed to, this, I can't overemphasize this point. This notion, he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. This is the cause and condition of everything that follows. And I think it's instructive that Bill tells us this. So Bill tells us this up front. We don't know a lot about Jim at this point. But what we know is the cause and condition. So that everything else now should make sense in light of that. Does that make sense? It's like Bill's removing the mystery for us. Like, why does he do this? To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in succession. That means, think about it, 6 slips in succession. which means he may be feeling a little bit hopeless. And those around him may be feeling a little bit hopeless. Okay, so the rest of this page I have in green. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed that he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum, i.e., the rehab, if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family, for whom he had a deep affection. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me do this. Donna, you are so good, thank you. Hold on 1 second. Thank you for posting this stuff. Okay, there we go. Okay. Oh, let me grab something, gang. Sorry, I just want to bring something up. Okay. All right. So, where am I? Okay. Thanks for rolling with me here, gang. I just realized there was something I wanted to show you. Remember this? When we talked about the commitment spiral? Okay. And just bear in mind also, this is just another, you could say, another lens that we use to understand the program and the spiritual process. I'm not saying, oh, you don't need the steps or don't think about, I am not saying anything like that. This is not in competition with any other perspective on recovery. It's just another way of looking at it. But let's go back for a second. On each of these occasions, we worked with Jim, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. Okay, pause. Does Jim understand the medical facts? Yes or no? Yes. Right? Because remember, okay, if we look at earlier in the text, what is it saying about a real alcoholic? It defines a real alcoholic according to the medical facts. Okay, so he gets the medical facts. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Does Jim realize there's a lot at stake? Is Jim like cavalier? Is he being like, oh, if I pick up a drink, it's a revolving door, I can come back, my family will still love me? Is that Jim's mindset? No. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. So my point being, he understood the medical facts. He has high resolve, right? Because there's a lot on the line. But where may he be deficient? He may be deficient in the spiritual design. Well, we know that. It's been established. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. But also, maybe there's a little bit of ego deflation, and we'll see a little bit of that in a moment. And if you want a copy of that, the link is in. Donna was so good; she posted a link to that in the chat. Okay, so moving on, we're at the top of 36, and yet he got drunk again. 7th time, 7th slip. So he knew the medical facts. There was a lot on the line. He got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. When my sponsor and I read this together, my sponsor always says the same thing at that point. He said, okay, where were you on Monday? Anyway, the next two sentences are pink for warning.
David, what were the first two sentences? Were they just green?
Yeti got drunk again is a warning. Thank you, Donna. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. Green. Explanation. Next two sentences are pink for warning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Both in pink. What is the underlying nature of Jim's problem? He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Are we able to see? And I didn't see, and I'm saying this because I did not see this for years. Those two sentences, I felt irritated that I had to be a car salesman for the concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Can I see the connection between those two sentences and the failure to enlarge the spiritual life? And why we're labeling those a warning? And bear in mind, so what we would call that is a resentment. We would call that a resentment. And I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Nothing serious for whom? For Jim? It may not be serious for Jim. What might the boss be thinking? Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at the roadside place where they have a bar. Both in green. Both those sentences in green. I had no intention of drinking. That's a warning. And why is it a warning? Well, first of all, what I've learned over the years is I've had that type of sentiment. I have no intention of drinking. That's the battle cry of the chronic relapser. It's not a lie. It's the truth. I don't think Jim's lying. The problem is he's using his desire for a drink as the barometer, as the indicator of whether he's on firm spiritual ground or not. That's the problem. The next couple sentences are green. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I'm just going to give Jim the benefit, and those are both green. I'm going to give Jim the benefit of the doubt here and say, I believe Jim had no intention of drinking when he entered that restaurant. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. Can any of us, I can myself, see how my disease has lulled me into a false sense of security? Now, I'm not saying that and again, our book says we shouldn't necessarily avoid places that serve alcohol. That's not necessarily the problem. but it might be a problem going into places that serve alcohol when we have unresolved resentments. Does that make sense? The rest of this paragraph is green. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk, still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. And I'm just going to, I'll make this part easy. The rest of what we're going to read today is all warning, all pink. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it wouldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment, and that's all in italics. So why do they put that in italics? They put that in italics to say, that's like flashing neon sign. Meaning, why is that a flashing neon sign? Because there's the mental twist. And the whole idea behind what Bill is trying to convey is that, remember, Jim failed to enlarge his spiritual life. The idea being that had his spiritual life been in better condition, that mental twist would not have occurred. But this is the pinnacle right now of Jim's powerlessness. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Okay, he's off to the races. Now that's not in italics, and I'm thinking it doesn't need to be because he's already consumed alcohol. So everything from this point forward, all bets are off. Because now alcohol is making the decisions. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of the intense mental and physical suffering when drinking, which drinking always caused him. Here's something else in italics. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. What that also means is I don't want to discount the importance of speaking to the slip and speaking to the process. But I hope that this will make sense. His problem is spiritual. His problem is not that he doesn't know the AA program. He might be able to sponsor any of us. He knows the AA program so well. But there's something else. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. So that means he understood the steps. He understood, you might say, 90 and 90. He understood to keep it green. None of that stuff saved him. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. And I'm not going to go deeply into this, but there is a link in the chat. I found out that whiskey and milk is actually a thing, even though I've never done it. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? I think there's more than enough for us to think about and talk about there. I initially intended to do 2 more paragraphs. Let's pick those up next week.